So again, thank you everyone for joining. This is the Appian 17.2 Product Announce webinar. Thanks for those questions. And again, if you have any questions, I'll be tracking those as well as answering all the questions at the end of the webinar. But of course, this is the Appian 17.2 release. As I mentioned before, it's going to be available on June 2nd of 2017 with subsequent releases in Q3 and Q4 of this year on our quarterly release schedule. And of course, for today's presentation, we're going to cover all the user, designer, and administrator features that are going to be introduced inside 17.2 on June 2nd of 2017. But first, let's talk about those user features. As I mentioned, the first capability we're going to talk about is the sale functionality with the Appian product, and specifically that new multi-file upload component. The new multi-file upload component is going to allow users to share multiple files in a single component. So this is not a new component, but rather an extension to the existing file upload sale component. You'll notice that there's a configurable limit, visual progress indicators, and of course also works on mobile, allowing users to simply select multiple photos, images, documents from cloud drives in a single action from a native mobile experience as well. So let's take a look at this in a short animation. And as you can see on the right-hand side, I'm selecting those 5 images, dragging them into the environment, plopping them into my system. And then you see those progress indicators as they're all uploaded in one action. So great productivity enhancement. As well, you also get the same virus scanning and content protection as we're uploading those documents. Now, if you look at the very bottom right-hand or left-hand of the screen, rather, you'll notice there's our max selections configuration. That max selections configuration allows me to configure how many documents I expect. If I want to limit that, I can limit it to a certain number, not allowing my user to exceed that number. So let's go over. The next sale component we have to talk about is the multi-column layout component. The multi-column layout component is going to allow a user or designer to lay out as many columns as they like inside an Appian interface. Now, this is in addition to, or can be applied inside of, sections, dashboard layouts, or even other new layout controls that we'll talk about shortly. And essentially, you get an effect like this, where I can not only lay out more than 2 columns, but as many columns as I like. You can also nest column layouts inside of each other. So if I want to create a different effect where I have a spacing of 2 columns, 50-50, and then on the right-hand side, create maybe a smaller spacing, inside of those, I can also create tables inside tables, we'll say, or column structures inside column structures. But to go along with this, we also have a new billboard layout control. The sale billboard layout allows you to create a nice emotive image graphic as a header billboard on top of any dashboard, task, record, report, whatever you choose inside the Appian product. It allows you to choose the background media as well as color. The background media can either be an image or actually a video as well. And you can also have a configurable overlay as well as the content and position. So I can actually configure that overlay. As you see in this, I have West Coast region, I have sales achieved as a horizontal bar on the bottom. I can configure that also to be in the middle, top, or be a column that's on the left, center, or right. So you have a lot of control of how you want to lay that out. That configurable overlay is also a layout control, so I can embed inside of there images, rich text, fields, as well as multi-column. So I can space out content, like in this example, some content being in the left, some content being on the right in a column or organization. So then, of course, next we also have an extension to the rich text component. The rich text component now allows for both positive and negative emphasis on text. So as I apply a style, you'll notice that there's a new style configuration for positive and negative, as well as that style allows me to also control the size. So no longer do you have size simply applied to the header, but you can now apply medium and large sizes with strong italics or bolding it to the configuration as well. So this is currently, though, web only. Expect this to come out mobile a little later this year as well. And of course, if you want to see style guides, we'll have style guides, updates to the style guides on community.appian.com as we release Appian 17.2. So 2 more with Appian Sale. Next, we have new button styling options. This allows you to have 2 new button styles. One is a link component and a secondary button style. You can see these represented on the far right-hand side of my example. I see an example of the link component. That link component, of course, allows me to see specific, or rather just see the text without the box. But if they hover over it, the box appears, indicating that this is a button. It's a way of doing a more subtle button control that you don't want to dominate the screen. Also, you see now the secondary link component, which is that gray link control. So it's not going to use the accent color. It's going to be less prominent, but again, clearly defined as a button by incorporating it in the box. You also have 3 new sizes for button controls, or rather 2 new sizes in addition to the standard size. These include large and small. Of course, the small size is great for adding, say, controls or a control menu. You have a small collection of buttons in a button array layout. Or you can have the large button control to emphasize a very large kind of prominent action you want to highlight to your end users. And lastly, with Appian Sail, we have enhanced confirmation dialogues. Confirmation dialogues are configurable on button actions, so associated with the button controls. As the user clicks on a button, you can have a confirmation dialog appear. Before Appian 17.2, the confirmation dialog simply prompted the user with text, as I see here, warning this request will be permanently deleted. Do you wish to continue? With simply a yes/no control. Now you have a little bit more styling control. I have a configurable header. The header now has a stronger emphasis, being both bolded as well as a larger font in that warning message. You still have the same text control down below. And then at the very bottom, of course, I have the button labels. So I can actually configure the button labels to rather say yes or no, say something like delete request. It's important to know, though, that the color and the styling of the button itself is adopted from the button for which passes the confirmation dialog. So if they deleted or clicked on, say, a button here with a destructive action going back to the previous page, you can see that that destructive action is in red, and therefore the confirmation dialog will also be inside red. If it was a secondary or a primary, it will adopt that button style as you go into the confirmation dialog. So with that, let's actually pop out of here and check out some of these configurations inside my demo environment. So first, let's check out the multi-column layout. So here's a great example of what you can do with multi-column now. So here I have a report dashboard. You'll notice that when you generate new report dashboards and things like the sample reports inside the Interface Designer, you also get an example of the billboard layout as I see at the very top. Now, actually, I see 2 configurations of multi-column. One of them is a nested multi-column. The first configuration is the obvious one right here, where I have 4 reports all together in a row. Of course, if there's not enough room to put a report or content, you'll also have the side scroll. So keep that in mind when you're trying to combine content inside of here, especially with bar chart reports that could have that side scroll effect. Now, of course, you can have, as I mentioned before, as many columns as you like. But also, if I go into my billboard layout here, then my billboard layout currently has this blue background. I can see, though, I have 2 columns. I have this finance, so let's say go highlight the columns here. Probably seeing a little bit of a configuration option here. So here I have that finance, and then I have this other area. So this is actually 2 columns first, which are doing an even split. I can do a 50-50. And then inside the secondary, this right-hand column, I have 3 additional columns inside of here. So great way to generate like side-by-side configurations where I have a greater data density of these individual fields and laying out things so they look nicely spaced out in your overall dashboard experience. Very similar to doing HTML with table controls and being able to nest those table controls inside of each other. So let's continue on. Next we had then the billboard layout control. So the billboard layout control, here I have a similar dashboard, but now I've applied an image styling behind the scenes. So you can actually apply whatever image you like. I can also, if I click on that billboard control, I can navigate to its configuration. I could also choose the height. So maybe if I want to have a larger image or maybe even taller, determine exactly how high I want that to be. As well as if I want to change the overlay style, maybe the black doesn't look as good, I can apply a dark overlay, which is going to invert those colors. So you can play with what looks best with the image that you're working with. As well as where do I actually want to position the content inside of here, such as top, middle, or bottom. Alternatively, I could also do a column overlay instead of a bar overlay position. That will allow me to configure things like whether I want it in the left, center, or right side of that area as well. Now, if I go into an earlier version of this, before I also had an example of using it with a video. Yeah, let's go to the even earlier version. So here's a great example of, instead of showing a image behind the scenes, I'm actually streaming an MP4 video behind the scenes of that layout. So it's going to stream really beautifully. One thing to consider is there will be no sound. So you're going to use this to create kind of a moving, emotive graphic at the top of that billboard. So if you want some type of panoramic, maybe it's like browsing a specific store location, I can create a short MP4 video. It'll remove the audio and stream that. This is the Big Buck Bunny video, which is an open source video project. To configure that, of course, you just configure the background media, choose the type of component, which I chose web video, and then I have the URL for that MP4 file, which I'll simply stream behind the scenes in that video image. And of course, even if I have video, I have the same configuration. So I can also, if I want to see more of the video, I go ahead and make that a bit bigger and now actually reduce and change the size of it as well. So going on, let's talk a little bit more about what else is new in Appian 17.2. So next is mobile push notifications. We're really happy to get this out. This is going to apply to both Google Android and iOS devices that are using the native mobile application container. Now, it's important to note that this also applies only for process and social tasks. So if you're sending a social task to someone, or if you're sending a process task to someone, they're going to get a push notification on their native mobile device when they receive that task. If they want to turn off push notifications, the same configuration applies to any mobile app. They can turn that off on the mobile device specifically. Another important note about this is only available to Appian Cloud customers. Because this requires us to set up existing relationships with Apple and Google push services, we're going to configure that for you. Any Appian Cloud customer who uses the latest mobile application is going to receive that automatically. So continuing on, next we have sites and enhanced branding. So we're going to spend a few slides here talking about all of our sites updates. Sites introduces some enhanced branding controls. First, the configurable accent color that came to Tempo before is now also available in sites. You can also now apply a dynamic logo as well as a fav icon based on a rule expression. So it gives you a little bit more personalization to the overall experience, as well as a little dynamic behavior. If you want to have a logo rotate based on maybe group membership or other types of content, I can have that rule defined which document I actually use to drive the logo inside the system. You can also have a new sites navigation option. So sites navigation allows users of sites to easily navigate between all the different sites they're using. That's going to appear in the upper right-hand corner, and there's a number of configurations available with that. Also, that configurable link to sites is also available from the Appian Tempo experience. So they can quickly navigate from Tempo to one of their sites as well. And you have configurable options to only show users what they can access. So it's all going to be based on security control, as well as if I want to disable Tempo navigation from sites, that's also available. Next, we have sites, configurable page widths. Configurable page widths are going to allow you to configure the appropriate width for each navigational tab inside of a site. So for example, here I'm seeing the wide width. The wide width goes edge to edge between the two sides. You don't have that padding effect that the existing Appian sites experience has. Now again, you configure this on the individual tabs. So I've selected sales regions. Inside that sales region now, I see that wide view. Now if I were to say select new order, it doesn't make sense to have that new order form also be wide. So I'm going to reduce that down to a narrow view to create greater data density, as well as not have some of those fields like that scan product field. I don't want it to be stretched across the entire screen. I want to make a bit more sense in having a narrow view of that overall content. So you configure this on the individual site level. But with that, let's go ahead and check out some of these sites configurations. So let's go back to my 17.2 samples. I'll go to my application library here. I think I have a good example already in the Appian CMF. Of course, everyone can download the CMF as well from the Appian App Market and go to this site's configuration. So if you've built a site before, right away you should notice a few new configuration options. The first one here is going to this option to show the site name on the navigation bar. So if you have this enabled, if I go ahead and click on that site, you're going to see this customer service request. You're going to see the name of the site inside that navigational option. Now, if you had chosen sites names that maybe don't make sense to your end users, there were maybe developers or for developers who had prefixes, you can also turn that off. If I turn that off, that navigation or that button off, you're going to get this navigation menu option. So that kind of collection of cubes, which is going to be the indicator of how they navigate to all the other sites inside the system. Let's go ahead and turn that back on. The next configuration you'll notice here is whether I want to show the tempo link or not. So you can see from here, inside that navigation, they do see tempo as an available option to navigate to from the site. Now, some of our customers want to keep sites users inside sites. They don't want them going into tempo, which has much more free-form access to collaboration. Maybe they want to have a much more fit-for-purpose controlled experience for those end users. So to turn off tempo navigation, simply choose never. I can go ahead and save. As I refresh then, of course, I'm going to see that navigation option disappear. I no longer see tempo as a navigation option from that site. If you don't want to keep them isolated, the best option here is to also choose only for selected groups. So what that means is I can go ahead and create a group that says I have a tempo message audience group. Only people inside the tempo group now will actually see the tempo navigation link. I'd probably encourage this type of design pattern as the default so you can apply that to all sites and also make it easy to enable tempo for certain users by simply including them inside that group structure. So go ahead and down below, the next configuration you see here is those expression option for documents. So again, if I go into expression, I can use any rule I want to go ahead and determine exactly what should be the logo for that specific element. So multi-file upload component, whatever I want as a rule, I can call that rule and have it the dynamic logo as well as favicon render inside of there. And finally, inside my new service request, I can see for this one, this individual page configuration, I have a narrow width set. I can change this very easily by saying standard, which is what we all have today in Appian, wide, which is the edge-to-edge layout, or the narrow configuration. Now I have two examples here. I have the new service request, which is currently set to narrow. So you see that behavior right here. It's going to shrink it up a lot tighter, make it much nicer to navigate the content in something that looks much more like a form interface in that kind of sheet of paper type look and feel. Now, if I go to my customer record though, is going to be a grid layout. So I want to just take up the whole screen inside of here. So now it's edge-to-edge layout for all the content. You'll also notice as I navigate to any of the interior content, such as the specific customer, all the interior pages will also adopt the exact same edge-to-edge layout and that configuration set at the top level tab. So even if I go to say I want to update the customer, any forms, anything that goes inside of this specific tab is now going to adopt that wide screen layout. Same thing with here. If I happen to navigate to a specific element, let's go to say Hamal. I want to go to check order status and I want to click on the order. If I'm navigating inside of that specific element, again, it's going to adopt the narrow screen layout of the original page of content. So just something to keep in mind as you configure these pages. So continuing on, let's go on to the next major section. Next, a few updates with Appian records. The first is with the user profile record. The user profile record is going to allow you to hide news now on the user profile page. So if you remember an earlier version of Appian 17.1, we allow you to now have a custom summary view on user profiles, which is basically whatever interface dashboard you want. Just like you specify a record dashboard in any record page, you can now specify record dashboards on individual user profiles. And then you can also hide the news activity. So if I choose to hide that news activity, this is what I see. Basically, I just see the specific user information. If you see down below, I don't see any actual content or news activity because I didn't have any dashboard configured and I had no news enabled as well. Continuing on, we also now allow for multi-selection of record filters. So if I want to enable this, I simply go into the record type designer, select the record I'd like to edit, and simply check a box on that user filter. Simply allow users to select multiple options. When you have this enabled, it's going to allow the users to do something like this. So instead of having a single selection, they can now choose multiple selections to filter lots of different content using a single filter. If we're going to see what these look like, let's go ahead and pop back over. I think if I go to my customer record right here inside sites, this filter, of course, will apply to both sites and tempo, wherever I have these record lists. Here, I've already enabled it. And again, I don't just want to see consulting. I want to see consulting, energy utilities, and healthcare customers. So I can do that multi-select using the new multi-select drop-down control to easily select all those elements in one action. So next, we have an extension to the Appian product in a partnership with Microsoft to extend Appian to the Office 365 platform with an Outlook 365 integration. We had pre-announced this late last year and are happy to finally release this in Appian 17.2 as a completed part of the Appian offering. You can now view and complete Appian tasks directly from Microsoft Outlook, from the web or desktop versions on Windows or Mac computers. But to check this out, let's just see how it works. So let's navigate over. Here I actually set up a Microsoft Office environment already. This is a Microsoft Outlook for Mac. This is the full client application. When I have the Office 365 application enabled, I'll get this option inside Microsoft Office or Microsoft Outlook to simply view tasks. So this is going to apply anytime I have a task control or a task notification inside the Appian inside my Outlook email. If I click on View Tasks, it's going to go ahead and open the task directly inside the environment. They can go ahead and complete the task right from here. Hit Submit, task complete. They also have options to save it, revisit this later on, or reassign the task to an alternate user. If I choose to say reassign the task, let's go ahead and reassign it to myself. I'll generate a new task notification. Reassign. That task has been reassigned, and if I do a send receive, again, to see what this is going to look like, shortly I should receive a task notification like this one, and then I can simply select View Task to access that task again. And here it comes. Here it is. And there we go. There's that task I just reassigned to myself and got a new task notification. So great. How do I enable this, though? So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about that. Going back to Appian, I'm going to go to the admin console. And inside the admin console, you're going to see a new option for Microsoft Office. Inside Microsoft Office, you simply have a checkbox, which is going to prompt me to basically enable or disable that item inside the system. So if I choose to enable that item, I have two things I need to follow here. I'm going to have to download a site-specific, what we call manifest file. This manifest file is something that you're going to deploy on your Outlook servers. That's going to allow you to inject kind of the Appian task capabilities on your overall email servers so that all your users of Microsoft Outlook can start taking advantage of this. So this is implemented on the server side and automatically pushed out to all the clients. It's not a per client installation. And as well, there's going to be some documentation. So as you click on follow the instructions for configuring Outlook, there's some simple instructions there how to configure Outlook servers to start leveraging that technology. So let's continue back and go back to the PowerPoint. Last slide on end user. Of course, every single release, we try to make it faster and faster. If you're using Appian 16.3, things like using IE11, you're going to see about a 60% increase in performance going from 16.3 to 17.2. For Chrome users, about a 40% improvement, and Firefox, about a 30% improvement. So encourage you to always be upgrading. We're always making optimizations to the overall sail architecture, trying to make it as fast as rendering as possible. Especially in this area, specifically applies to rendering of large grids inside records. So that specifically applies to that large record grid configuration. Now let's continue on with the designer enhancements with Appian 17.2. First is the decision designer. So if you saw some of the announcements from Appian World, we're really happy to get this out. It is a zero-code, efficient, intuitive rule design experience for basically building complex logic in a simple, intuitive fashion. So what do I mean by this? The first thing is it's going to allow you to use DMN standard operators. DMN stands for Decision Modeling Notation. It's a standard way by the OMG for capturing decision tables. Also, it has a lot of intelligence built in, such as the first one, completeness checking. So it's going to analyze all the logic of your rules and figure out if there's any gaps in those logic. So here I have values 0 through 18 and 21 through 55. Now it's going to tell me right away, wait, I'm missing any type of consideration for values of 18 to 21. As well, if I was missing any states in my state drop-down list, also going to allow me to apply logic completeness to any expected values. Next also is HIP policies. HIP policies also allows me to simply check if or modify the execution logic of the rule itself. First, I have a unique HIP policy. Unique HIP policy mandates that every single row inside my decision table must be unique and fitting a specific category, as well as I want to check it for covering all possible iterations of the rule or the completeness check. First, alternatively, is going to return the first output that matches. So it's going to go through rule order, fire off rule statement 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 right down the list, and return the very first hit it receives. The rule order configuration is going to return all hits in the order for which they were processed as well. So if I had multiple rule statements here that all applied, then it's going to return a compound result back of all the values that were true. And finally, you can also test the entire environment right in line. So you can create test scenarios, implement those test scenarios while I'm inside the design time experience to validate all the logic. Well, let's go ahead and check this out and maybe build a new rule. So let's pop back over, go to my design experience. Let's close a few windows here. We'll get to that happy face in a little bit. 1 second. So let's go ahead and say add a new decision. You'll notice inside the Appian design time experience, you see a few new options. The one is that new decision option, and we're going to cover the new integration option in the very next area. Let's call it sample decision. Call it 17.2 samples. Create and edit. And here's the very start of it. Now, there's a few things I want to introduce you to orient yourself to the decision table. First is the left-hand columns that are in white are your input columns. The dark gray columns on the middle are basically your output columns. And the far right is my notes. So if I want to capture so many types of notes of why I wrote this specific rule, I can write those right here for design design dialogues with our designers. So very first, if I want to change these inputs or add additional inputs, simply click on the plus. That's going to add additional inputs. Let's say I want to have an amount input, and that's going to be a number value. So now I have that amount option. If I want to say, well, this one doesn't make sense anymore, let's go ahead and delete that input just like this. And let's also configure, say, state. And for my state input, I want that to be text, but I don't want them to be able to I don't want to have to type in all the states, right? So I want to use a drop down to a list of values. Now I can choose to simply type the values right here. So I can say Florida, Virginia, Texas, like this. And I can just go ahead and say these are the values, are actually the labels and the values I'm going to save. Or alternatively, I can actually use expressions here. Expressions now allow me to leverage integrations, existing constants, whatever I want. So let's say I have an existing constant which has my list of states. And not only that, if I did an integration or some type of complex action, I'm going to get a preview of it right here. So this is actually what it's going to look like. So there's all my states. I already had that saved in a constant. I can just use that as is, hit OK. And now I have a nice states list populated right here. So second, you have then outputs. Outputs can also be configured just like inputs. I'm going to say maybe I have a process I want to fire. And outputs, though, have greater options to output specific Appian design objects as well as standard data types. So, of course, standard things like Boolean, numbers, text are all supported. But you can also output documents. So I might have a use case where if the following condition is true, then I need to define a specific set of documents the user needs to fill out. Or alternatively, maybe if I want to have a dynamic process routing situation, I could choose process models. Let's go ahead and choose that. So from the process models, I want to choose, maybe I have some different service requests I need to handle, whether it's going to be routed to my European group, my African group, maybe my Australia group, or say my Central Asia group. And as well, I might have some different logic on who actually gets assigned this. So I can also output either users or group structures as an output of the environment. So if I choose, say, output a user, I can go ahead and start typing in and searching all my users right here. Anthony Hill, say we have Patricia Johnson, and Paul Rao. Now, as I define this, I can quickly see that all the individual statements are valid for the output, but I have not much configured on the input. So let's go ahead and fix that. First thing I want to say, well, if my amount is between, say, 0 and 50, then I want, and the states are coming from, say, let's say here, I'm just going to choose my A states, the A states. And if the value is, say, between 50 and 100, then I want to say Delaware, Connecticut, Colorado. And if I want to say maybe between, say, 100 and 1,000, then I want to say all my DFG states. And if it's greater than 1,000, then I want to have my Hawaii, Idaho. So looks reasonable. I could also change these to say, any or is null, like I didn't receive a state as well at all. And if I go ahead and test this, well, let's see if this makes sense. I got $15 and they're coming from Alabama. Go ahead and test that. It looks like something fired. They're all unique, but I have issues. It's highlighting right here that I'm actually missing. It looked like it was complete, 50 to 100. But wait, I used a from operator and a between operator. So the from operator is inclusive of the endpoints, we'll say. So it's inclusive of 0 and 50. But the between operator means that it's not inclusive of the value of 50 or 100. It's actually between 50 and 100. So I can see now that since I have between 50 and 100 and 100 and 1,000, the value of 100 and 1,000 are not accounted for. So if I just simply change this to say from and from, well, that makes sense, right? Fix. No, wait, it's not unique anymore. So it's going to make sure that logic makes total sense. Well, if it's from 50 to 100, well, that should really be from 51, because if it's 50, it's going to overlap with that first rule. Same thing here. I have an overlap between 100 and 100. It could fire off both conditions. If the value is 100, let's go ahead and change that to 101. Test that again. And now it looks good, but wait, I still have conflicts. I have some overlap, or actually it's telling me I have a whole bunch of other states I didn't account for. So what if they choose Louisiana, Michigan, Missouri, New Hampshire? Those are not accounted for in my logic. So maybe instead of a unique, I'm going to choose a first. And go ahead and test this. I still have that logic hole, but it's going to say, well, it's going to be valid because it doesn't require uniqueness. It's just going to go through the order. I could also possibly have overlapping rules. So if I do have Alabama, Alaska, and let's say I have 50, make that, there we go. So now I have a conflict that if it is the value of 50 and it returns, so this is actually valid because it's a first order. That technically would return both because it's Alabama in both and 50 in both. But if I change that to rule order, maybe I actually want to return both of those. So now I can see rule order actually is returning both of those first two rows of logic because I want to get all those policies that are true. So lots of different ways of using this. Encourage you to explore it. But as I said, the most important thing to know about this is that you can apply these decisions anywhere inside the entire Appian product. You can essentially go towards the, use it in Interface Designer. You can use it in Process Modeler for dynamic routing, use it inside when to enable actions on a record, or possibly in the web API or integration capabilities. Possibilities are almost endless to apply this decision logic in the Appian product. And speaking of Integration Designer, we also have another brand new design time experience based on building integrations. So these integrations are now no longer isolated inside Process Designer or inside rules. You can now build integrations standalone test them for rapid feedback and design time guidance, and also use them more easily across the entire Appian product. So inside the Integration Designer, you notice that this is a low-code HTTP integration designer. It's designed specifically for RESTful endpoints or RESTful web APIs. And of course, it has a lot of the same robust design capabilities of all the other designers. But let's just go ahead and see this in action as well. So let's go back to my 17.2 samples. And I can go ahead and filter now by integrations, so I can see all my integrations I've configured. And check out the integration pane. So like all the design time experiences, the left-hand side is the designer. So just like interface designer, we have design view. This is my design configuration for the integration. My middle is the kind of runtime test environment where I can actually see what's going on. And my far right-hand side is my inputs, the content I expect to feed this rule in order to fire it off. So here I can see I'm going to test a facial detection URL or web API from Microsoft Azure. I went ahead and filled in the facial detection service right here. I then also have, does this require basic authentication? Yes or no, or basic or none. The method I want to use, there's a robust set of methods supported inside the environment now, as well as usage, whether it's going to modify data or not, or simply query data. Down below then I have my parameters. Of course, you would get the parameters and header configurations by reading the documentation of the API for which you want to integrate to. So you would go ahead, read those documentation areas, and then understand what's going on. Let's see. So anyways, going back to the integration designer, we also then have the configuration of the body. So at the very body, we then want to say, I'm going to take in this image URL and I want to pass it as a JSON string. Now you'll notice that this JSON function here has this little indicator 17.1R1. I'm going to cover that a little bit later about our function evolution, but we'll simply say we're going to do a toJSON function to convert this specific input to a JSON string that the Microsoft Azure service can use. So if I feel good about this, let's get that baby face picture. So let's go ahead and analyze this happy baby. And I'm going to test it right here by feeding in the image URL configuration, hit test request. And there we go. We have the success. Now down below, I can see all the results. I can see the type that was returned, the type of data that was returned, a dictionary type. I can also see the specific body, which is all the JSON string for which I'm receiving back. It's going to tell me that this is a male baby about 0.5 years old, and his emotion is 100% happiness. So looks about accurate. So Microsoft Azure service is working great. I can also see more details about the specific request. What did I send to the actual string, or what did I send to Microsoft? And then what exactly did I get back? So the detailed kind of parsing of that integration. If I feel good about it, simply hit save, and now you have the same capabilities to do apply this as a rule function anywhere in the Appian product, in process modeler, in interfaces, in web APIs, whatever you like to do, you can now apply this across the product. You can also, of course, use things like precedent analysis to see where all this facial API is being used, or all the precedents it's relying on, as well as any dependence, all the objects that are depending on this integration. So once I build an integration, I can very quickly see now all the ways that integration is being used across the entire Appian product. So let's pop Appian out, and that is Integration Designer. Next, you'll notice that there's a new look and feel to a number of the designers. A lot of you may be familiar with the updates to the end user look and feel we applied in Appian 17.1. That same new look and feel is starting to roll out across all the new designer experiences, such as Expression Rule Designer, Interface Designer, Record Type Designer, Sites Designer, Web API Designer, and of course not mentioned here, the new Integration Designer and Decision Designer also use the new look and feel. We've also taken time to update the Appian Process Modeler with auto-connecting nodes capabilities. What this means is, as you drag and drop content from the palette to the canvas, you simply can drag the nodes directly onto the anchor points of another node. It will automatically create the connection and then create that flow for you. So again, saving number of clicks. Here now, if I lasso and move something over to the right-hand side, and then go ahead and drag an input directly on a line, you can now also apply those directly on line connectors to insert a activity right on top of the line inside of a flow. So the whole point of this, again, making much more productive, fewer clicks going back and forth, toggling between your line connectors and the activities. You can do this all in one fluid action. Next, we're going to talk about the Interface Designer. We have a number of updates on Interface Designer. The first one is about changing components. Many of the components inside the Appian Interface Designer are very similar, such as the drop-down component, very similar to the multi-drop-down component, as well as the radio selector or the checkbox component. Those are 4 different components, but all very similar configurations. So if you want to rapidly change your mind, say, well, I configure this for a drop-down component, but my users want this to be a radio button now. I don't have to go back and redesign this for a radio button. Simply click on that little convert action design view, choose the item you want to convert it to. So here also go ahead and click on convert, maybe choose like a radio button control. And now that drop-down component suddenly becomes a radio component. All the configurations what you had before are passed over. So very simple, intuitive to change your mind of how you want those components manifested inside the interfaces. Next is Sail Component Visibility. So this applies to every single component and every single layout and every single button. There's a new option at the very bottom that says it's called Visibility in the Design View, or a parameter called Show When. If you configure that Show When parameter with a rule function that returns either true or false, you can set on a per component or per layout basis when you want things to appear or disappear. So why this is valuable? Before this, you had to configure or nest all those individual conditional shows inside if conditions. You no longer need to nest those inside if conditions. You can simply apply conditional logic directly on the components to essentially drive that dynamic behavior when things should be visible or invisible. Inside Interface Designer, we've also extended the ability to click on individual items. Before Appian 17.2, the input area was not clickable to select it inside the design view pane. Now the full component, so the input area as well as the overall header and instruction footer area, are clickable to more easily navigate to the object inside the design view pane. We also allow you to select component or structure. So this is one of my coolest, or I think one of the coolest features, is that when you select an individual component, you can now see all of its nested or how it's nested inside the environment. So when I select paging grid, I can go up and say, well, it's actually inside a contents, which is inside a section, which is inside another contents, which is inside now a dashboard. You can see how the pink highlighting denotes exactly what I'm about to select. So maybe I don't actually want to select the paging grid. I want to select the section which the paging grid is embedded inside of. So it makes it super easy to navigate the structure from the live view selection screen. And then finally, we also improved error handling inside the overall Interface Designer. Now when you have an error inside your logic, instead of just blanking out and showing the error, you now have the subtle overlay on top of the interface. So you can still see exactly what your interface looks like, but it's indicating to you visually that, hey, this is in an invalid state, so I can no longer interact with the interface. And it's also showing me a very strong warning message that says, hey, you could not display the interface because the following misconfiguration in your code. You should go back to the design view or inside the expression view and correct that to enable the view again. So much easier error handling for Interface Designer. Going on to overall expression design, also applying to interface design, is the new keyboard shortcuts. So when I'm inside the expression designer, inside interface design, you'll see a little question mark in the upper right-hand corner. If you hover over that question mark, you're going to see a control menu or a help menu appear, which has hints for all the hidden keyboard shortcuts. A lot of our customers are figuring out some of these keyboard shortcuts or maybe happen to browse the documentation, but now it's super intuitive. You just navigate to that question mark. You can see all the keyboard shortcuts for quickly navigating the entire expression editor. We also made it 30% faster to use the auto-suggest feature. So this is when I'm typing ahead, I'm typing maybe a function name or a variable name. It's overall 30% faster in returning the auto-suggested values that you might want to use while building an expression. That speed up not only applies to Interface Designer, but it applies to all the different uses of Expression Designer throughout the entire product. And then finally, Interface Designer performance improvements have also been applied. So we have a number of ways for editing of values, editing EV values, navigating decision values, adding and editing inputs have all seen anywhere from, say, a 20% to 50% improvement from 17.1 to 17.2. Now, going into the expression editor environment, we've also improved the formatting of expressions. So when I type an expression, this applies to Web API Designer, Integration Designer, as well as Expression Designer. When I'm building an expression that's returning an output, such as a JSON string or a data dictionary, we're going to make the content much more human readable by properly applying carriage returns and indentation, making it easier to see the structure of the data return. Not only that, is we're going to also return the type values. So I can see here, I'm getting a data dictionary of type RPM property list. And here I can actually see the data dictionary list with proper nesting to understand, well, this is the address value, the ID is this, and here's the address. And then here is all the property information. So much easier to read when I'm working with these expressions. Finally, one small update on Quick Apps. Quick Apps now apply a self-reference. This has been a point of feedback from a number of users, minor point of feedback, we'll say, that when I build a Quick App, I also want to create Quick Apps that are able to reference records of the same type of that Quick App. So now if you go back and update the Quick App, it's not available on initial creation, but rather just update, you can come in here and say, well, I wanted to define this relationship to a record as one of the fields that points to the Quick App itself. Now, also, we've extended editing awareness for all common designers. So in Interface Designer, we see this in Appian 17.1, that if you're editing an interface and another user comes in to edit that same interface, they're going to receive this message that someone is already editing. Now, they can choose to break that lock and edit anyway, or they can view it in a read-only manner if they just want to see the content. This editing control applies to Data Type Designer, Decision Designer, Expression Rule Designer, integrations, record types, and web APIs. All those designer experiences now have this editing awareness capability. Now also, well, what happens if someone takes control away from me? So even the user who's going to lose control when someone edits anyway, the user who was doing the editing before is going to get this alert that someone else is starting to edit your interface. They can see exactly who stole control of them. So if there's any conflict, you can see exactly who's actually trying to steal control from you. I can have a quick link to their user profile. So if I need their contact information, I can get that card access or their phone numbers, or I can actually break the lock and steal it right back, save my work before they continue on as well. So record type also had a minor update to the record type designer. The first one is security settings. So now inside the record type designer, you can go ahead and say, configure that security settings by going to the gear menu in the upper right and choosing security. You no longer need to modify security settings from the overall designer experience. It's now inside the record type designer. And also we have a very important update to looping functions inside the Appian product. This means that you no longer need to use the apply and apply components functions. We encourage you to take a look at the for each component, or the for each function rather. The for each function is a much more intuitive way of creating looping items to loop over an array of data and return either maybe components or expression logic that I need to calculate inside of. To make it even easier, there's special variables that only apply to the looping function for each. These include the FV item, FV index, item count, identifier, is first and is last controls as well. Now, if you want to access these special FV variables, simply type in FV bang while you're inside the for each function. You'll get a drop down of all those variables: identifier, index, is first, is last, item, and item counts. So each of those has a special function, like index is going to be the index of the value I want. Item is the current item inside the array. And you can use these throughout the entire logic of your expression to understand the exact, say, array of where I am, or the where I am inside the overall array iteration. So let's see the difference between using apply or for each. So the apply function, very simple on the left-hand side. This was a simple one for apply. So apply is null for this array. So the first parameter is the expression I want to run. The second parameter is the array. So very simple for the apply function. For each, I have items. I define the array first, and then I define the expression for which I want to use. Now this is basically a lambda function inside Appian, so I can apply an expression inside of this function to pass it a lambda and calculate that function for every single item inside the array. How do I pass the items? So this one is automatically going to iterate over the items. It's going to kind of just imply context of the array. This one I'm going to call the isNull function. I need to explicitly pass it fvbang item. Now that seems, hey, this seems like more code than this one. Well, let's actually take a look at the last one here. I want to apply for all my products, I want to apply the product function for all my purchase requests of quantity and price. And for some reason, I had to merge these. So I need to merge quantity and price and then apply the product function, which is a multiplication function. This didn't really make sense. I just want to have a simple expression. I want to multiply quantity and price to get the total for each purchase request. That seems like a simple request. Apply seems a little convoluted way for doing that. So let's make it much simpler with for each. So I want to do for each my items. This is my array, all my purchase requests, and my expression is, well, I just want to do the current item, quantity, current item dot unit price. So you can see I can just directly use the fvbang item and get to all of its data subset elements. So I can see all the sub-elements of that data dictionary, and I just apply the multiplication function using the star right there. So much more intuitive way of iterating over all that content. So last point on the looping function, the expression parameter for abang for each can contain sale components and load variables, which is a great value. It's not only replacing the apply function, but also replaces the apply components function with even more power and performance. It does automatic state management with no array variable parameters, so it automatically knows where it's at. You don't need to kind of keep track of that with array variables. And as well, the sale components can save directly into fvbang items, so it knows its context. I don't need to create loops over the array indices to understand where I am in the array for the save function. I can just say, hey, when I run this expression, save into fvbang item. It'll know exactly where I am inside the array and know exactly what indice to save into. So much simpler use for, especially with applied components. So next is the evolution of naming functions. So the first to apply this is the toJSON function. Inside the toJSON function 17.2, we made some changes to how we calculate and translate dates inside the toJSON function. To preserve backwards compatibility, if you are using the toJSON function anywhere in the Appian product, you're going to see it renamed to this toJSON underscore 17 underscore 1. That simply means that that's going to be the function reference for the backwards compatibility of how you're currently using it. If you use the toJSON function today, there's a subtle change around how we convert dates, which is different from how it applied in 17.1. So it allows you to still adopt the toJSON function while maintaining full backwards compatibility of all of your existing designs. In the last few minutes here, let's cover the administrator functions. And the first area I want to cover is something actually I skipped over inside the 17.1 release. But you can now manage plugins directly from the admin console. So this is available for Appian Cloud customers. For those cloud customers who want to easily deploy plugins from our open source app market community, you can simply search for, navigate, and browse all the plugins available inside the application marketplace, and in one click, deploy those to your Appian Cloud instance. So you no longer need to create support tickets to ask for deployments. You can manage the deployments and undeployments of those easily right from the admin console. Overall application server startup time now is also 20% faster, or rather there's a 20% decrease in startup time, or 20% faster. How we apply this is basically we reduce the number of calls between the Appian system and its primary data source. This reduces the number of processing required to load system objects. So that's where that speed boost comes from. Now, if you had a large number of objects inside the data source, it might still be less than 20%, but you should see up to a 20% decrease in server startup time of the application servers. We also officially end support for TLS 1.0. So officially with 17.2, this will be the last version where TLS 1.0 is officially supported. We will completely end support for this in August 2017. We certainly do hope everyone has upgraded to TLS 1.1 or 1.2. This is recommended by web security experts, the PCI alliances. You should not be using TLS 1.0 unless you're open, because it does leave you open to potential security violations of your system. So please upgrade to TLS 1.1 or 1.2. All of our cloud customers, I believe, have already been upgraded to those environments as well. Also applying to Appian Cloud only, we automatically compress processor archives after 90 days. So this is going to be a default behavior. If you're archiving off processes to disk, after 90 days of being added to the disk, we'll also add that to a compressed zip file. Now, if you want to unarchive and bring that archive data back, you will need to submit a technical support request. That technical support request can also then unarchive that data for you. Customers may request also adjustments to the settings. So if 90 days it does not work for you, if you want to be more aggressive or less aggressive with that date, simply call up Appian Technical Support. We'll be happy to adjust that on a per customer basis. Finally, for on-premise customers, we also have support for Oracle WebLogic Server 12c, or also known as 12.2.1 is now supported. So you can now start upgrading your WebLogic servers to 12c. As well as inside the admin console, we now also support a color picker for branding. So you'll see this as I click on the color item. If I'm configuring the branding control, simply click on the little color. You'll get this nice color wheel, as well as an eyedropper to select a specific color in the overall page. And as well, we now have extended the import-export inside the admin console to also include embedded settings. This will include not only themes, but also your cores settings. The core settings are your cross-origin resource sharing, which is a security configuration of which servers can actually embed your content. So you no longer need to configure these in your production environment by hand. You can now simply include these in the admin export package and then import them into your target admin console on production or test. If you navigate over to the rule performance, you'll also notice that there's by minute calculations for rule performance logging. So simply toggle aggregate by minute, you'll see much more granular detail of the overall rule performance of individual rules inside the system from the admin console. And then next we have file extension blocking. This is a system-wide feature list of extensions to block on a file upload component. So important to note that this is both inclusive or exclusive. So I can say, I want to block files with a specified extension. So very popular, we'd recommend block files with the exe extension, block files with a DMG extension for Mac users, block maybe JAR extensions, jar files. These are extensions we'd recommend blocking. You can do those as an exclusive block, so everything else will be allowed, or you can say, you know, I only use this Appian instance to capture images. I can just block everything else. We also have another option there to block any file extension that does not match its underlying MIME type, M-I-M-E type. So what that means is, if you've ever seen this hack, you know, hey, I want to email you an exe file, but email doesn't allow me to email executable files. So let's go ahead and just rename it to .txt. We'll actually read the underlying MIME type and make sure there's been no renaming of the file type to bypass the upload blocking. We also now allow mixed authentication for mobile access. So if you have users, some of them using maybe a SAML authentication, some of them using Appian authentication, we now support mixed authentication from mobile devices, some from either or when getting access inside the native mobile app container. And finally, you have no character limit anymore for terms of service. So for those users who are using terms of service, you can now have an unlimited character limit. I believe it was 10,000 before 17.2. Now you have an unlimited character limit inside that terms of service, which they must hit the I agree button before accessing the login screen. As mentioned before, this is Appian 17.2 coming out on June 2nd, 2017. Hope you can join us coming up in Q3 and Q4 for the 17.3 and 17.4 releases. Receive lots of great feedback for potential future improvements of future product. We'll be right back here on the Appian Product Announcement webinar with 17.3 with our response to those requests. Thanks everyone for joining, and look forward to seeing you in Q3.